Why George Washington bought teeth from his slaves. George Washington was a progressive man for his time. Despite this, he owned more than 500 slaves. He changed his views on slavery toward the end of his life, but he wasn't the kindest master to his slaves. He even bought their teeth to make dentures. At least, he paid for them. The slaves lived at his plantation in Mount Vernon. Washington inherited the property and the slaves at the age of 11. It was a massive 8,000-acre plantation. It was split into 5 different farms. This made family life difficult for the slaves. Washington himself enjoyed quality time with his wife and children. Enslaved families had to live separately sometimes. They often had different designations around the plantation. Tight working schedules meant they rarely saw one another. Spouses sometimes lived on different farms 3 miles away. The slaves worked a 6-day week with only Sundays off. The maternity leave for the women was 3 to 5 weeks. Still, they worked from home, doing tasks like sewing and knitting. They were expected to return to work after that. The slaves had to grow and cook their own food. They also had to repair their torn clothes. Most of them had multiple patches on their garments. There is a record from Polish poet Julian Niemcewicz. He visited the plantation in 1798. He wrote,
"Their habitations cannot be called houses. They are far more miserable than the poorest of the cottages of our peasants."
Still, historian Dorothy Tuhig said,
Food, clothing, and housing seem to have been at least adequate.
Washington also expected his slaves to work hard. In a letter to one of his overseers, he wrote,
"Request that my people may be at their work as soon as it is light. Work till it is dark. Lost labor can never be regained."
He demanded every slave, male or female, to work as much as their strength allowed. He warned not to harm the laborers' health, though he wasn't particularly concerned about them. He just didn't want to lose free laborers to illness. It didn't stop Washington from buying their teeth. A record from the Mount Vernon plantation book details the transaction. Washington's dentist, John LeMayor, purchased 9 teeth from a slave. Tooth transplants and such transactions were common at the time. The surprising part is that he paid £6 and 2 shillings. It was only a third of the commonly accepted rate. This clearly indicates harsh exploitation. No wonder some slaves attempted to escape. One such attempt happened during the American Revolution. A group of 17 slaves managed to cross enemy lines. 14 men and 3 women found refuge in a British warship on the Potomac. The slaves closest to the Washington family also tried escaping. Hercules, their cook, successfully escaped from the plantation. Martha Washington's maid, Ona Judge, did the same. She learned of her owner's plan to present her as a wedding gift. Washington's assistant, Christopher Shields, tried to run away with his fiancée. This attempt was unsuccessful. George Washington wasn't altogether cruel after all. He reduced his transactions involving slaves in the 1790s. In his will, he ordered their slaves to be freed after his wife's death.